In today's video, we're out here taking a look at the Fiat 500x, which is the close Italian cousin to the Jeep Renegade. The 500x is a subcompact crossover, although I suppose you could also refer to this as a subcompact hatchback, and this competes directly with the Honda HR-V, the Toyota CHR, and the Mazda CX3, just to name a few. Although Fiat is calling this a 500x, it's actually more closely related to the Jeep Renegade than the 500 without the X or the 500L. Up front, this is instantly recognizable as a member of the 500 family. We have these large and bubbly headlamp modules, and if you ever forget what you're driving, there's actually a 500 logo right inside them. That large Fiat logo there in the center with this chrome wing around there. We have turn signals and then fog lamps below. The trim that we're driving today is the trekking model, so even though we don't have all-wheel drive in this particular model, we do have the more rugged-looking front bumper. At 168.2 inches long, you can think of the 500X as sort of the American-sized Fiat 500. The Fiat 500 is considerably smaller than this, and I've always thought the 500L just looked a little bit funky, especially right around this part of the vehicle. In terms of size comparisons, this is a little bit shorter than a Honda HR-V and a little bit longer than a Juke or a Renegade. Like the two-door 500, we have a rear hatch that rakes a little bit forward. That does mean that the cargo area is a little bit less practical than the squarer or more upright options in this segment, but you'll still find more practical cargo room back there than in something like a CX3. The family styling continues out back where we find these large tail lamp modules, single exhaust tip over here on the passenger side, and again we're in the trekking model, so we get a slightly different treatment to the rear bumper. As we see with the regular 500, the tail lamp modules are part of the body. They don't open with the hatchback. In the US, you'll find two engines under this hood. Things start out with a 1.4-liter turbocharged engine that produces 160 horsepower and 184 pound-feet of torque. That's basically the same engine we see in a few other Fiat models. That engine is mated only to a manual transmission and only with front-wheel drive. If you opt for that engine and transmission combination, you'll get 28 miles per gallon. If you want an automatic transmission, then you have to upgrade to this 2.4-liter naturally aspirated engine. It produces 180 horsepower. Thanks to the 9-speed automatic transmission, this will definitely get you from 0 to 60 faster than the 1.4-liter turbo, but you do have to give up 4 miles per gallon. This engine is mated only to the 9-speed automatic transmission, so if you want the manual, you have to get the 1.4. If you want the automatic, you have to get the 2.4. If you get the 2.4-liter engine and all-wheel drive, then fuel economy drops down to 24 miles per gallon, which is on the low side for this segment. Front seat comfort is excellent. I'm going to give this 10 out of 10 points whether you're comparing this to subcompact hatches or subcompact crossovers. These seats are very thickly padded. We also have a slightly longer seat bottom cushion than we find in some out there that makes it more comfortable for taller drivers. And we have an available 4-way adjustable lumbar support, which is very rare in this segment. The driver also gets a tilt telescopic steering column with a decent range of motion. You should know that like many economy cars, although we do have a power driver's seat, we don't have a power passenger seat. Rear seat comfort drops down to 7 out of 10 points. The seats themselves are quite comfortable, but we have less legroom than we'll find in a Honda HR-V, and headroom is a little bit limited because this model does have the moonroof option. The moonroof option is a double pane design, so we have a pane right here up front for the driver and front passenger, and one right here above my head for the rear passengers. As we typically see with moonroofs, however, this does cut down on the headroom. Moving over to the middle seat, we find a seat that's a little bit more comfortable than the average entry. I have just about the same amount of headroom as I do on the outboard seating positions, which makes sitting there a little bit more comfortable than in many subcompact crossovers. And if I move all the way over to the right side of the vehicle, where this front seat was all the way back in its tracks for a front passenger that was 6'5", I still have about half an inch of legroom left. You won't find an armrest or cup holders in the back of the 500X, although the rear seats do fold down and we do have bottle holders in the doors. Behind the rear hatch, we find 14.1 cubic feet of cargo space, which is about 3 times what you'll find in the two-door 500, although it is notably behind the 500L, which has a cargo area that's a bit more square. This is about 50% more storage space than you'll find in the Mazda CX3, but it's notably smaller than the Honda HR-V, which has an absolutely enormous trunk for this category. We are in one of the top-end trims, so keep that in mind as we look around the interior. Our model has again this 2-pane moonroof setup where we have that smaller moonroof right there above the rear passengers' heads, and then this larger one above the front passenger and driver's heads. As you can see, the shade is not completely opaque. It does let a decent amount of light through. That does give me a bit of a headache in really strong sunlight. We have 2-way adjustable headrests and height adjustable seatbelts for the driver and the front passenger. The model we're driving has this attractive brown leather. It features sort of a mottled appearance. We have 500 embroidered right there on the seat back, and the center sections of the seat back and seat bottom cushions are perforated. You should note that although they're perforated, they are heated but not ventilated. Moving over to the front doors, we find more soft touch plastics than you find in the average entry in the segment. We have a soft touch upper sill, a very thickly padded center insert right here, and a very, very thickly padded armrest. This actually is probably one of the most comfortable armrests I've seen in a subcompact vehicle. Under the window switches, there's a storage compartment where we find the speaker grill and a bottle holder. Moving over to the dashboard, we have a soft touch injection molded upper section that actually wraps all the way around to this lower section, which is also a soft touch material. Then we have this hard center section, which has sort of a metallic effect paint job to it. This section right here opens to reveal a small glove compartment, and then we have a larger glove compartment below where I was able to put a tablet computer. The model that we're driving has a 5-inch infotainment system that features AM, FM, satellite radio, as well as USB and iPod media integration, but we don't have navigation or, of course, CarPlay or Android Auto. You'll find the engine start-stop button on the left side of your screen attached to the steering column. Then we have some buttons right here in the center console to enable and disable the parking sensors, the traction control, and, of course, the hazard light button. Below that, we have 2 air vents with open and closed knobs, the optional 2-zone climate control system, buttons for the heated seats, heated steering wheel, USB input, and auxiliary input. And then below that, we have a storage cubby right there with a 12-volt power outlet. The 500X uses a pretty traditional console shifter. Drive is all the way back here towards the driver, manual mode over to the left. We push away from the driver for gear change down, pull towards the driver for gear change up. Behind the shifter, we have a drive mode selector knob that features an auto mode for most driving situations in the middle, sport mode over to the left, and a traction plus mode for adverse weather situations. The key should be fairly familiar to you if you've driven any FCA vehicles recently. The model we're driving has a remote start functionality. Between the front seats, we have 2 large cup holders and an electric parking brake. Behind there, we have an unusually thickly padded center armrest. This opens to reveal a small storage cubby where we also have a USB input for that infotainment and navigation system. The instrument cluster features an analog speedometer on the left, tachometer on the right, and in the center, we have a large color multifunction display with digital readouts for the fuel level and the engine temperature. The large color LCD is very similar to what we see in other FCA vehicles, and it gives us a wide variety of different readouts, from our digital speedometer to trip computer information. There's a drive mode readout that tells us how much power is going to the left and right wheels because we are not driving the all-wheel drive model. We also have a vehicle info screen which tells us the tire pressure, oil temperature, battery voltage. We have a driver assist system. There's a display for the safety systems that are integrated in the vehicle, audio information, and of course vehicle messages to tell you when something is wrong, and you can change certain vehicle settings right here in this display as well. The wheel is a 3-spoke design with a flat bottom and sport grips on each side. The display is controlled via this button bank on the left side of the steering wheel. The steering wheel itself looks very much like Fiat's other wheels, but also bears a great deal of resemblance to what we see in current Jeep models as well, with these large button banks on the left and the right. In our acceleration test, this model ran from 0 to 60 in 8.4 seconds, which is a little bit faster than the last Jeep Renegade that we tested. That's quite logical since this is a little bit lighter than the Jeep. This is right about the same 0 to 60 time that we see in the Mazda CX3, and this is notably faster than the HR-V or the Subaru Crosstrek. You might be surprised to know that many vehicles from Mini are not going to be that much faster than this. That's because their base 3-cylinder engine vehicles are fairly slow 0 to 60. In our braking test, we ran from 60 miles an hour back to 0 in a fairly short 120 feet, which is a very good score for the subcompact crossover segment. Braking distances in the 500X are shorter than the HR-V or the Subaru Crosstrek, and this feels more sorted when doing those hard braking maneuvers than either the Honda or the Subaru. That's likely because this is not as high off the ground, so we have a lower center of gravity. Things generally seem to feel a little bit more stable under those maneuvers. When it comes to handling, this scores an A very easily. Handling is definitely impressive in the 500X for the compact crossover segment. This is easily a direct competitor in terms of handling ability and handling feel to the Mazda CX3. We don't get quite as much feedback from the front tires as we find in the Mazda, but the steering ratio is nice and quick and it has a good heft to it for carving this car out on your favorite winding mountain road. Thanks to the extra power under the hood and the 9-speed automatic, this is also going to feel a little peppier than that CX3 when you really start pushing it hard. Now on the flip side, this 9-speed automatic transmission is not as smooth as the transmissions that we find in the other entries in this segment. That's all down to the design of this particular transmission. Every vehicle that uses this same transmission, whether it's a Land Rover or a Jeep or this Fiat or certain Acura or Honda models, all has the same kind of feel to it. If If you want to know more about that, there's a separate video on my channel that goes into deep detail about why the 9-speed automatic feels the way that it does. When it comes to the ride score, I'm going to give this an A-. This is definitely firmer than something like a Honda HR-V, but it actually has a fairly decent balance to it. This doesn't feel quite as punishing as the Mazda CX3 can on rough roads. You should keep in mind that subcompact crossovers like this are generally going to be a little less comfortable when it comes to the quality of the ride versus a compact crossover. We have a much shorter wheelbase, so there's less time for the suspension to try and settle itself after the front tires go over a bump and then the rear tires go over a bump. You'll especially notice that out on washboard pavement, where vehicles that are small like this tend to teeter-totter backwards and forwards. In our cabin noise test, this scored 74 decibels at 50 miles an hour, so I'm going to give this a B+ when it relates to other subcompact crossovers. Over a week of mixed driving, we've been averaging 25 miles per gallon in this front-wheel drive model. That's right around what the EPA says you should get in the 500X. However, I'm going to give this a C- when it comes to our overall fuel economy score. The 9-speed automatic definitely tries its hardest to give us excellent fuel economy, especially out on the highway, but this older 2.4-liter engine lets us down a little bit. In addition to that, the 500X is a little bit heavier than some of the other compact crossovers that we see, especially entries like the HR-V or the CX3. It's not too hard to find a small crossover that's about the same size as this, but gets over 30 miles per gallon. We definitely get better fuel economy in that Honda HR-V or the Subaru Crosstrek. Of course, those two vehicles are notably slower 0 to 60 than this, but something like a Chevy Trax or a Buick Encore or a Mazda CX3, they're going to be about the same 0 to 60 time, and they're going to give you better fuel economy. If you're wondering how this compares to the Jeep Renegade in terms of overall on-road feel, this is much more sporty. This is much more sorted, it handles better, it feels better, we have less body roll, better grip, etc. That's because the mission in the Renegade is very different. It was definitely designed for off-road use, so it's higher off the ground and it's also heavier than this 500X. Some people may scoff at Mini comparisons, but the 500X really does remind me a great deal of the Mini Countryman out on the road. For 2017, the 500X starts just under $20,000. However, you'll notice that if you add all-wheel drive or if you want the next trim level up, then it's going to set you back about $24,000. For 2017, the 500X starts at just under $20,000, but simply adding all-wheel drive appears to bring the price up to about $24,000. The reason for that is the all-wheel drive system requires that you get the 2.4-liter engine and the 9-speed automatic, whereas the base model has the 1.4-liter engine and the 6-speed manual. Coupled with the automatic transmission and the engine upgrade, there are also a few features that you find in the all-wheel drive trim that you don't find in the base model. That's also why there is effectively a $3,400 difference between the base model and the front-wheel drive trekking model. While some folks out there might be interested in the 500X with the manual transmission, I suspect most people will be shopping in the $24,000 to $25,000 range with this vehicle. That makes a lot of sense because in addition to the larger engine and the automatic transmission, jumping up into the trekking trim also gets you alloy wheels, the center armrest, the leather-wrapped steering wheel, the 5-inch infotainment system, XM satellite radio, and a number of other features that are starting to be essentials in this particular category. My top likes for the 500X are definitely the exterior and interior styling. This looks unique in this segment. It doesn't look like your average boring crossover. In addition to that, the front seats are very, very comfortable, especially the driver's seat if you get the top end trim with that 4-way adjustable lumbar support. On the downside, the 2.4-liter 4-cylinder engine is a little bit rough around the edges. It doesn't help that the 9-speed automatic transmission is not one of my favorite transmissions. It's an awful lot less smooth than the CVTs or 6-speed automatics you find in the competition. However, it does help the 500X get class-leading acceleration and decent fuel economy numbers. First up, let's talk about the Honda HR-V. It is the second best-selling subcompact crossover in America. Interestingly enough, the Jeep Renegade is actually the best-selling compact crossover, and it's, again, the close cousin to the 500X. It's easy to see why the HR-V is such a popular vehicle. It starts low at $19,465 with the manual transmission. If you want the automatic transmission, it sets you back a lot less than the 500X at $20,265. All-wheel drive is also an inexpensive option. You can get your HR-V with that for under $22,000. However, we do get a little bit less equipment in the HR-V than we find in the comparable Fiat 500X. And that means that in general, the HR-V is only going to be a few $100s less expensive than a comparable 500X. But you can get far more features in the 500X than you can in the HR-V. Again, that very comfortable multi-way power driver's seat with the 4-way adjustable lumbar support, that's something that you don't find in the Honda. The Fiat wins when it comes to front seat comfort, but the HR-V wins when it comes to back seat comfort. The rear of the HR-V is cavernous. That also applies to the HR-V's cargo area, which is very large for this segment. On the downside, the HR-V does not handle as well as the 500X, and it certainly does not accelerate as quickly as the 500X. In fact, the HR-V is one of the slower entries in this group. On the flip side, the HR-V is likely going to be one of the most reliable subcompact crossovers because Honda does have an excellent reputation for reliability. Next up, we have the Mazda CX3, which I think wins the award as the most attractive subcompact crossover. In addition, the CX3 is an awful lot of fun to drive. It is not terribly swift 0 to 60, do keep that in mind, but the handling feel and the handling ability are both excellent in the CX3. Overall handling ability is going to be better in the 500X if you get the top-end trim with the wider tires, however, it's never going to feel as nimble as the CX3 out on the road. In addition to that, Mazda's 6-speed automatic transmission is much more of a team player than the 9-speed that we find in the 500X. When it comes to accommodations, the Fiat is definitely more comfortable and more spacious than the Mazda, both in the front seat and in the back seat. In addition to that, we definitely have more cargo space in the Fiat than we find in the CX3 because the CX3's rear cargo area is really quite small. The 500X offers more options and features than most of the competition. However, the CX3 actually offers a few things you don't find in the Fiat, most notably Mazda's radar adaptive cruise control system with their advanced safety package that also includes autonomous braking, and of course the LED headlamps that Mazda has spread pretty much across their lineup. Next up, we have the Mini Countryman. Obviously, the Mini and the 500 are definitely selling on style. You can think of the two vehicles this way. The Mini is the designer label, the Fiat is the more mainstream label. However, in terms of overall price tag, the two can get fairly close because the 500X realistically starts, again, around $24,000. The Mini Countryman starts at $26,600. However, you get less in the Mini Countryman for that $26,600 price point. The base model Mini Countryman comes with a 3-cylinder turbocharged engine that is definitely slower than the 500X. There are, of course, more powerful engine options in the Mini, but they will set you back notably more than the 500. The big thing to keep in mind when shopping for a Mini is that if you get carried away with options, it's pretty easy to double the cost of your car, and that's not really possible over on the Fiat 500 side. However, there are many more ways you can customize your Mini, so if that's something that you're interested in, you'll definitely find that over there with the Countryman and not with the 500X. Next up, we have the Jeep Renegade. As I said before, the Renegade is the best-selling subcompact crossover in America, and it's the close cousin to the 500X. But very importantly, it is the off-road cousin to the 500X. The 500 was really designed for on-road all-wheel drive use, and the Renegade was designed for off-road or rugged road all-wheel drive use. The Renegade is a little bit more compact than the 500X, and it's a little bit less expensive. At $17,995, it undercuts the base price of the 500X by nearly $2,000. Of course, you get less in the Renegade for that low price. Unlike the 500X, the Renegade does offer all-wheel drive in the base model with the 1.4-liter turbocharged engine, and that will set you back right around the same price as the base price of the 500X. However, very much like we see in the Fiat, if you want the automatic transmission, you have to bump up to the same 2.4-liter 4-cylinder engine that we see in the Fiat, and that will set you back about $22,000. That price difference seems to carry right on up the line. Comparably equipping the Jeep Renegade to the Fiat 500X, the Renegade is going to be a little bit less expensive. It's also going to be more capable off-road pretty much across the line. When comparing the feature set of the 500X to the Renegade, they are quite similar, but my preference is the 500X in terms of overall comfort, the Renegade for utility, as well as that off-road ability. If you plan on taking your subcompact crossover off the beaten path on gnarlier gravel roads or dirt roads or rutted roads, the Renegade is going to be a little bit more comfortable for that, and its all-wheel drive system, especially if you get the top-end Trailhawk trim, is going to be more capable. The Trailhawk trim of the Renegade is very unique in this category because it is an off-road focused model, and that's not something we find in any of the other subcompacts. There are so many subcompact crossovers available in the US these days that it is a little difficult to pick a winner here. But my top pick would be the Buick Encore, which we did not talk about, but is still one of my favorite subcompacts out there. It's comfortable, it has a very quiet interior, the fuel economy is excellent, and it handles fairly well. The downside, of course, is that the Encore is going to be more expensive than the average entry in this segment because it is slotting in the premium group, which is sort of one notch above where the 500X plays and one notch below where BMW's X1 plays. If you're looking for something that's more mainstream or more affordable, then I would take the Mazda CX3. It is an awful lot of fun, and I would personally be willing to give up the rear seat space and the cargo space for for that fun-to-drive nature that we find in the CX3. I would probably also take a fully loaded CX3 with the radar cruise control and the autonomous braking package. Thanks for taking the time to check out this video. Again, I'm Alex Dykes, and this has been the 2017 Fiat 500X. Be sure and click that subscribe button down there at the bottom of your screen so you can be updated on all of our latest videos. Find us over at facebook.com, and if you want to support this channel, head over to patreon.com and look us up over there. I'll see you next week.